Welcome back to our channel. My name is Ismail Ayouaz. This is From the Outside In. I am with my great friend Robin Kerner for our third episode. And today we're going to discuss the executive power of the president. And Robin, this is crazy. Over the years, over the decades, I would say over the last decade, because I've been in this country for over 10 years now, so probably not enough history here in this country for me to talk about what happened before 13 years ago. But I lived in the US, the United States of America under Obama, under um, President Trump, and President Biden, and all of them have been using overtly the executive privilege that they have to, to kind of pass not laws but orders that everybody is supposed to comply with. How outrageous is that? I am strongly believe that it should really come from emergencies. There's an emergency, then the president is making an executive order, but now they're using that for everything, right? If they cannot pass a law that because Congress is not on their side, then they're going to have an executive order or whatever. So, what's your take on that? Really, it's upsetting to see all of this.
Well, there's a lot to this, Ismail, and you're right. It's where to begin? You mentioned emergencies. We actually are living under multiple states of emergencies that have been declared by presidents over over decades. So currently there are multiple executive orders in force because the government claims that we are in a state of emergency for all kinds of things. And I bet there's nobody listening who could list all of the states of emergencies that the United States is in right now, because it's not just COVID and the pandemic. And has been in, as I say, for a long time. So that's a problem. The fact that anybody basically, or the president, can almost choose states of emergency and set them, and then we're stuck with these semi-legitimized, you could say, executive orders on the back of them. So that's one huge problem. The fact that we're all experiencing emergencies that actually, if you ask anybody in the street, they would have no clue about. So there's that. Then there's, the fact of the, I guess you might call it the deep state, to use a well-worn phrase. But the fact that under the executive, or in the executive, you have many, many agencies that have rule-making powers. And this is because Congress has, again, over decades, abdicated their responsibility under the Constitution to govern and pass laws. So they basically hand off to the executive and the executive agencies and all their technocrats various tasks, and they give those technocrats the power, like the IRS, for example, to make rules in pursuance of certain legal ends, and then we all have to live under those rules. Now, that's bad enough, but of course, then you have the executive power exercised through the executive order, which then tells all of these technocrats that can themselves pass rules that we all have to live by, what they have to do. We don't get a look in. Our representatives don't get a look in. Yep. And interestingly, and we might talk about this, a few people saw this coming at the founding of the country. And, it was noted at the time of the writing of the Constitution. In fact, in a letter to John Adams, from, I want to say, the grandson of William of Orange. So I'm going back to the 1700s here, of course, who just told John Adams, you have given yourself a king under the name of president. And here we are.
Let me ask you this question. I know we're supposed to talk about executive orders, but you say something I want to piggyback on. Why did Congress and the Senate, U.S. Senate, give up the powers to allow non-elected officials, people in the IRS, as you say, probably other agencies, to make rules, and even when we know that it's unconstitutional, you still have to abide by those rules
Mm,
until maybe the Supreme Court or a federal judge say, "Hey, it's unconstitutional."
that's
I
right.
mean, how is this possible? We have a beautiful
Mm.
document behind you, the Constitution, and I just don't get it. Why it's still allowed, and why people we are electing over and over are doing nothing about that. Look, I'm going to give you some numbers here. Um, um, Going back to the executive order, I guess there are two questions there, but I have numbers here. I'm looking at my other screen. So far, Joe Biden from 2021 to 2022 had issued 77 executive orders. Donald Trump 220 during his term, 220. Barack Obama, in these two terms, 276, which is very close to Donald Trump in one term.
Mm.
George W. Bush, 291. So I guess
Mm.
this is the same. Is that yes? In one side, the president is elected from the people, so he has that executive power that he can use. But when I see the number, it feels to me it's a lot of decision made without Congress, who truly represent the people, I would say,
Yes.
having a say in it. And then you have also, in the other hand, people who are not elected, agencies that you might think that are probably unconstitutional. I'm sorry, but the Department of Education. I'm not sure it's it's part of the. There's anything that talks about education in the Constitution, but anyways, that's for another subject. Making rules and having decisions that are going to impact the American people on a regular basis, if not every day, and we're doing nothing about it.
Well, we've got to ask, how is this serving Congress, right, to basically abdicate their power? And I don't think any of us can be surprised at the answer. The answer is it allows them to grow government, right? You see, if you want government to have so much more control over people's lives, then, well, if you're going to manage that control directly by passing laws on every little thing, that's a lot of work for you. You don't want to be doing that work. So you've got to create a body that can do a bunch of that work for you, right? So you make the big laws and then you just hand off all the little intrusive details to these agencies that you authorize. So, yes, I think there is a huge issue with the constitutionality of this. But here we are by creating these agencies and like you mentioned, the Department of Education saying, right, go do this. Then the Congress can say, right, we've got it done, and move on to the next thing. So it allows them to grow government orders of magnitude more than they would have been able to if they actually kept doing their jobs as defined by this document behind me. And I think that's the only way you can make sense of it. I mean, in a way, there's a kind of a trade-off being made, right, by the House, by Congress. They're giving up the ability to minutely regulate, but they don't really want that because they want to do the big regulations anyway. And they hand that ability over to bodies that they create. So here we are. And I mentioned the IRS. The one that I had in my head when I said that is the fact that they can penalize you for not paying your tax the year before it's actually legally due. Right. I mean, I do my own tax returns and I'm not, I don't have a wage, I'm, you call it self-employed or whatever. And so I have to pay my estimated tax. And if I don't pay the right amount the year before it's due, they can charge me a penalty. I'm like, how is that even allowed? I mean, I tell you what, if I was a multi-millionaire, I would make a list of things like this. And I would say, right, I want to be a legal guinea pig. We take this to the Supreme Court. I would happily spend my life going to the Supreme Court trying to take these things down. I could give you a longer list.
But let me ask you about that, about this, dear IRS. Is the issue is that we have an agency, and some people say it's not a constitutional agency, but that's for another debate. Is it because they ask you to estimate something that they should be doing? What's the real issue here?
Oh, no, my point is that the IRS and other agencies like them, I'm just using them as an example, right? Like the EPA is maybe an even worse example, have this delegated authority to make rules that have the force of law. So the IRS
I got it.
decides
Yeah.
that I have to pay in quarterly installments a year before it's legally due a guessed amount of tax. I just, I think our having conceded that principle, well, I haven't conceded it, but the nations haven't conceded it. I think it's an awful situation for us.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And if you take a look at what it's happening with cryptocurrencies and the random rules that the IRS put in place and hurting people, I agree with the idea that if you make money and then you withdraw that money in your bank account and you're using it, I understand that you have to pay a small tax on it. But the problem is that it's not small tax; it's a huge tax. So people basically, I am paying taxes on things that I took a risk. I put my money on cryptocurrencies. There's huge risk there, and then if you take that money back, or the profit you made, the IRS is going to ask you to pay a large percentage out of those profits, and so.
Oh, hold on, but isn't that law? Isn't that capital gain?
Yes, this capital gain. This is where I'm not having a big issue with that, although I think the tax rate is very high, which I hope it could be lower, but that's one thing. But the problem is that they're going to ask you to also pay a tax. Let's say you have one cryptocurrency, you exchange it for another one, right? And you just want that to be working for you. You're not withdrawing the money. You're not exchanging that for US dollars. It doesn't go to your bank account. You have to pay taxes on the profit you made by switching from one currency from another over a certain time. So again, there is a rule that says, if you are making much, let's say you're making more than, it's an example, I'm not sure about the numbers, but if you're making more than $2,000 of virtual profit by switching from one currency to another, then you own taxes. So there's a limit.
Wow.
I don't know the name, but anyways. But my point is that this has never been approved by Congress. Cryptocurrencies is changing lives of millions of humans, if not billions of humans in the world, and a lot in the US. A lot of people have become extremely rich with cryptocurrencies, and the IRS is coming after every single Americans who has invested in cryptocurrencies with dubious rules like this. And there are other rules that I don't remember, but it's I can tell you that, again, my point is all about making rules without Congress approval, and it's all about always taking money from people for whatever they want to do with it, going to war in Ukraine, I guess.
Well, yeah. Oh, God, and there's a show. We'll do that one.
But again, you get my point.
One of the, yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, another absurdity, which I think is very damaging, that comes out of normalizing, this way of running country, is that okay, so for example, the Congress might pass a law on safety that essentially values human life at a certain amount, right? And then the EPA will pass a rule that requires, let's say, massive spending, right, on compliance, let's say by a farmer with some regulation about a chemical, which if you translate into lives saved, places the cost per life saved on the farmer of billions of dollars rather than thousands. I mean, literally, the span on the implied price of or value of human life or year of human life, according to all of these rules by all of these agencies, it spreads over orders of magnitude. So it's completely incoherent. And it means that the impositions on different people in different walks of life in the United States are completely unfair and disparate. Mm-hmm. But because there's no single body, the actual body who should be doing it, Congress, coherently doing this, right? They just let it all off to all these different agencies which then operate their own ways. There's this kind of embedded unfairness and massive, not only economic imposition, but, general personal impositions on people, because that are actually, these impositions are made by unelected people. I mean, let's be clear about this, right? Nobody in the EPA was elected. It's outrageous. But of course, there is a real issue here that needs to be solved, which is, well, we live in a big complex world, and we do need bodies that are expert to be able to make certain rules, and
Yeah.
and we can admit all of that. But there's got to be a way to do this such that all rules that govern our lives go through a democratic process.
I agree.
I mean, there is a way, right?
Yep.
The way would be to have a much smaller agency that sends the reports up and says, right, this is what we advise.
So, Robin, the IRS has its own armed force to enforce their rules. So, my question for you is, what about the president and his executive orders? What are the consequences with that?
Yeah, okay. So this is why the whole situation is so terrible, right? Because it's not just that de facto lawmaking power has been delegated to agents. It's that de facto law enforcement power has been delegated to these agents, right? So, the IRS, they have people with guns. I remember a few years ago, there was a massive order for, I want to say it was hollow point bullets, that the IRS placed, and it was completely shocking. But so this is important, because what that means is when the president signs executive orders to direct his agents, which means all of his employees in all of these agencies, he's directing an enforcement function, right, that is outside the police, which of course is run by states and cities, right, which is for actually enforcing the law, especially criminal law, right? He's got this whole enforcement mechanism that he can operate just with, the flick of a pen. And, that is what a dictator is. I mean, there's no other way of putting it, right? And, as I said, it was written to John Adams by William of Orange's grandson, as I think it was from memory. You have given yourself a king under the title of president. Well, yeah. I mean, today we might not say king, we might say dictator. But now, look, and I don't want to say, I know that's a provocative thing to say, because I'm not saying that Biden, thinks of himself, or Bush, or Obama, or Trump, maybe one or two of them, I don't know. But I'm not saying that they think of themselves in that way and that they're using this power, malevolently necessarily. But the fact is that, again, another quote, that the worst tyranny is that exercised for the benefit of the oppressed, right? These presidents, even if they think they're doing the right thing, we have conceded to them a dictatorial power of rulemaking and enforcement, and we should be a bit terrified by that. And if people still aren't, if people think I'm being hyperbolic, I mean, I'm not, I'm just saying facts, but if people think I'm being hyperbolic, let's just look at the recent OSHA ruling at the Supreme Court, right? Biden was able to direct his agents to enforce a rule, right, that would require people who worked for companies with 100 employees or more to either lose their job or show their papers regarding their status about a particular vaccine. In other words, do you want to keep your job, or do you not want to put something into your body? I mean, it's bodily job or bodily autonomy. Now, it was interesting that the Supreme Court, in a 6-3 ruling, said, no way, you can't do that. Thank goodness they said that, because this kind of stuff is existential for America and what America was founded to be. But the fact that the president thought he could give it a punt, right? He had a chance that there wouldn't be riots in the streets, and there were no riots in the streets, right? And that 3 of 9 justices thought, yeah, that's all right. I mean, It shows you how far we have come. And it's that how far we have come sense that I think motivates you and I in this show, you and me in this show.
This is what I don't understand, is that why our fellow Americans, the ones who were born and bred here, haven't done something before to prevent that to happen. We are today with a tyrannical administration who tried to, by the force of law or the force of an executive order, having employers infringing of privacy rights that you and I and everybody in this country should have. We know, healthcare privacy is it should still be a thing in this country. But we're telling employers, private employers, you need to force your employees to get vaccinated. Otherwise, you're going to be penalized, and your employees are going to be themselves penalized because we're going to prevent them to go to work, to get to the grocery stores, etc., etc. That is tyranny. This is, everything that we thought will never happen in this country, but it's happening here in America. And if it can happen in America, I don't know where there's going to be another free country in the world, because America is supposed to be the beacon of freedom and liberties, right? It's just, as an immigrant, I didn't come to America to see that happening. I can hear some of people who disagree with me, go back to France. No, I'm going to stay here in America and continue to fight to make this country as good as it was couple decades ago, before probably 9/11, but that's another story. But Robin, this is tyrannical. This is authoritarianism at best, and people like you and me, we need to be on the forefront to fight that, to wake up the masses. And I think a lot of people are awake right now. But as you said, when you have three Supreme Court justices who are okay with that, when you have millions of Americans who identify as Democrats, who think that, the president was right with his executive order, that they think it's okay to deprive people from their basic rights of, going to the grocery store, having a job and stuff like this, we are in big trouble. And that is very concerning to me.
We are in big trouble, and it's not just a Democrat thing. I mean, George Bush, and after 9/11, it was all the same thing, executive orders, and now we've got the surveillance state, and so on and so forth. And you mentioned America's supposed to be the beacon of freedom. When I was young, it had a moral standing, a moral force in the world that it doesn't feel to me that it has now. And that is a great, great shame. It's something that brings me a lot of sadness, actually. And one thing I noticed, here we are mouthing off a French American and a Brit American, but you can see now, get on YouTube, anywhere on the internet, you can find lots of immigrants from real tyranny, right? People who fled maybe the Soviet Union. Some people, Chinese folks, you get on YouTube and hear them say, okay, here's what America is doing that is just lockstep.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so you might want to stop there. But that's the
thank you for saying that. I just want to piggyback, because I'm so passionate about this thing. You're absolutely right. There's plenty of people who start speaking out, immigrants from those tyrannical countries, or where there wasn't the same freedom and liberties as we still enjoy, or enjoyed in the past. And these people are speaking out, and I really encourage anyone who's watching this video to find these people. If we can find some links, I'll put them in a comment down below. But a lot of people now are speaking out, people from China, from Russia, from South America, saying what is happening in America, it's insane. And they're like you and me, we're we didn't come to America to see the worst of other countries happening here. Right. So it's an extremely good point, Robin, about, telling people to see other immigrants from worse country than France and UK, seeing what's going on in America and making the analogy with what happened in their own native country. And this is real. You have to be in a bubble, in a cultist tribal bubble, to not see that happening. To see that.
Well, actually, I'm not sure you do. All you need to do is see, America is also the victim of its own success. Despite the fact that as we're discussing here at length, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, these things are being ignored left, right, and center. The fact is, that is to a large extent how the country started. And so America had a small government for a long time, a non-intrusive government for a long time. It built a certain kind of culture. And so all of that means that Americans now have a very cushy life. They have a cushy life. They're very comfortable, right? And they're busy and they work hard. They're productive. They care about their families. They care about their work. So they don't have time to be marching in the street and so on and so forth. I mean, there are good reasons. There's also the cognitive dissonance thing, right? So as, I don't know, some viewers might know, I work a lot in political psychology, and big for everybody knows about the need to avoid cognitive dissonance, right? To not have the discomfort of holding two ideas in your head that conflict with each other, right? So what you tend to do is you avoid the evidence for one of those conflicting ideas. And it's a natural phenomenon. It's not a conscious thing in most cases. Now, what is it that Americans believe about America? Well, they believe that it's the land of the free. They believe that it's the home of the brave. They believe that they were born in a rejection of tyranny. They rejected George III and all his tyrannical shenanigans. Now, this is telling, actually. Let's do a little historical diversion. George III never signed an executive order in his life. In fact, nor did the monarchs before George III, going all the way back to James II in the 1600s. James II tried one executive order, and the Brits kicked his ass out, right? And we had the Glorious Revolution and so on and so forth. And that might be another show, right? Now, in other words, you have to go back to the 1600s to find an executive order in the UK. We're knocking them out here multiple a day, right? So, this goes to the king under the name of president. So what are we, now, Americans don't know generally what I've just said because they've got their own narrative about who they are. Well, every country does, and every person does, right? So why would you even notice that? Why would you even think that the fact that that maybe the motherland from which America won its freedom, Britain, has had 0 executive orders since the founding of America, whereas America has had 15 or 16,000. There is nobody, interestingly enough, in the UK, including the monarch, that has the kind of power that Biden wields through executive orders on a daily basis. The prime minister doesn't, and the capital M monarch doesn't, and that should be instructive. Actually, which country really ended up with the tyranny? Was it the UK? Or was it the US? And I don't want to. I know we're using big words here. I know when you say things like tyranny, it's provocative and it's in danger of alienating people because they're not feeling the tyranny in their everyday lives, and because it's all normal to them. They don't actually know what they cannot do. Were they to do it, that the agents would come with their guns, right? Because they're just getting on in their little narrow. Living their life in their whatever kind of narrow way they want to live it, and they don't feel impinged upon. But there's a lot of things.
I need to say that because when I use, yes, you're right. I think sometimes I use the word tyranny. How did you say that? As a kind of a word to in a passionate way, you can say. But if I read I just Google tyranny and it says cruel and oppressive government or rule. If we go back to the idea that you want to force a jab on people who might be perfectly healthy or might not be perfectly healthy, but the jab is not for them because they have comorbidities or conditions, it's to me oppressive and cruel, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, I agree, but I'm going to. I mean, it would be for me. I would have to be cruel to pass that rule. However, I'm going to allow that Biden and people who support him believe that it's in everybody's best interest. I don't think it's being done with ill intent. I think it's naive. I think it's incredibly stupid.
I disagree with that. I think that
Okay.
and I respect and I appreciate your point, Robin, very much. But now, at the time where OSHA was pushed, we already had enough information to understand that the vaccine had benefits, but also could also be very dangerous, and that was not something that could be pushed the way it was pushed by the Biden administration and some aspect with the Trump administration. Let's not forget that the Trump administration also pushed a lot.
Oh yeah, they're all the same.
But what I'm trying to say is that with the information that we had, and even when the start of the COVID, and we're not here to talk about COVID, but just as a segue, a lot of people were saying, no, let's not go too fast. There are other, way to treat that. And all of this was suppressed. This is cruel and oppressive to me when you start suppressing information that could save lives and you're pushing for something that we are not sure about. So this is what I'm trying to say. I think that this whole executive order of trying to push for a vaccine, especially at the time it was done, was to me oppressive. The way it was done is take the jab or you're going to lose everything. That is not America. This is not who we are.
I think it's clearly not American. It's clearly oppressive. But I will, to play devil's advocate here, people supporting Biden would say, actually, it was the suppression of information that helped save lives. I mean, it's not ever a case I would argue, but but clearly millions of people believe it. And almost everybody is kind of happy enough with it that they're not in the streets. I mean, let's just get to it. At what point do we see mass acts of civil disobedience? I mean, what is it going to take, right? I don't know. You see, that's an interesting one. As I'm asking the question, I'm wondering what the answer is for me. I was relieved, to say the least, at the Supreme Court striking down the OSHA mandate that we've been discussing. But what would have happened, what would have happened if they didn't? I would have gone on marches. I would have been prepared to do that. I'm not generally a marching kind of an activist. I am an activist. But I did march against the Iraq War. And I think this is definitely, this is every bit as awful as that was, but going into Iraq, I should say, under false pretenses, because I think there are false. I am agreeing with you that there is certainly problems with censorship with the honest dissemination of information.
Yes, there was.
Yeah, and also I need to say too, I some people may know this. I thought the Brexit. The ignoring of the Brexit referendum in the UK was potentially existential for democracy and basic rights in the UK. And I got on a plane and I put my name forward to stand for Parliament, and it was very disruptive in my life. But so I will act when it comes to these things, and I certainly think if OSHA hadn't been if that hadn't been struck down, I would have joined the marches, but would there have been any marches? I mean, that's our question. You and I are motivated to do this podcast, Ismail, because, as we've said a few times, there are wonderful things about America that we would like to stay America, right? But they can only stay America if Americans care enough about them to demand that they remain. And I'm not sure.
This is what we see. I think half of the population is like us, from all backgrounds. And I know I say half, it's maybe not accurate, but a lot of people, I hope, and I think I see, want to preserve all of this. And you have another huge part of the population who wants to completely dismantle America from the ground up, and that's and
I think from the top down, actually.
Or from the top down, actually, you're probably right. No, I would say some from the ground up and some from the top down. I wouldn't be opposed to change the way we govern, but while we keep the Constitution, actually maybe even clarify it sometime, because there's too many times where we need the Supreme Court to clarify things. Or you still have people today are going to tell you it's another discussion, but the Second Amendment, we should ban all guns, blah blah blah, because then the second, there's. In my deep belief, I think the Constitution is a great document, especially the Bill of Rights. But somehow I wish we had a Constitution that didn't have so much room for interpretation, where basically a president like Biden can use the executive order to push for OSHA. If,
Yeah, here's the thing about that, right? So this is something else that we haven't actually made explicit yet, but we need to. Whatever the Constitution says, the burden is on the people hurt by an executive order to take it to court. It's a huge burden, right?
It is.
And so the fact, once the political culture normalizes the passing of these kind of executive orders, it makes complete sense for the president to just give it a go, right? Because it might stick. Right, because there's so many obstacles.
It's very dishonest. It's dishonest.
Yes,
do we want to be ruled like this?
It comes back to the Congress. It comes back to the representatives who have abdicated their responsibility.
Yes,
shame on them, right? I mean, frankly, a president with that kind of power, who's been handed that kind of power, don't blame him for exercising it. I mean, it's like blaming an alcoholic for having too much alcohol. What do you expect him to do? He's a guy at the top of a...
I think the blame is shared. We need to blame both parties, Congress and the president. When you're a president or when you're a human being, we call something personal responsibility. And you need to exercise that personal responsibility with judgment, right? And the judgment is to say, I'm going to not use this because I know that the Constitution, it's against the Constitution. And therefore, I'm taking personal responsibility. I know I have good judgment. I'm not going to use that. Nowadays, it looks like personal responsibility and good judgment is lost. From these people on the top of the chain.
But it's not. But hold on, it's not clear, Ismail, that the signing of an executive order is against the Constitution. It's not mentioned in the Constitution. But the president is the employer of all of the agents in the agencies. He has to be able to order them. He has every right as the executive to give orders. We'll call them executive orders. The problem is, what we were saying earlier, that those agents and agencies have themselves been given, and this is Congress's fault, rulemaking and rule enforcement power, right? It comes back to Congress.
I think it comes back to Congress too, but when a president wants to write an executive order, they have tons of constitutional lawyers around them that they can ask for advice, say, hey, what do you think? Is it constitutional or not constitutional? And before signing this little paper, they should be advised, well, it's not constitutional, you're going to have trouble. And if a president hears that from a constitutional lawyer, say, okay, I don't want to take the risk. I am an honest president. I don't want to sign something that I know it's not good. I guarantee you that for OSHA, okay, I was not there, but my deep feeling inside says that Biden knew it and he decided to go ahead with it because he said, I'm going to do it. A lot of people are going to comply, even though, it's unconstitutional. Companies are going to comply, which happened. We're going to have a lot of people vaccinated. And then the Supreme Court eventually is going to say, no, it's unconstitutional. But between the time the Supreme Court is making its judgment, its ruling, there will be like millions of people already being vaccinated, even though, you know what I'm trying to say? So this
I agree. And that's what I'm saying. I'm saying it's worth him, he can get some of the effect. He can get the punt. He can get the discussion going his way. He can actually get these things implemented until such time as the rest of us who have the burden of having it struck down in the Supreme Court, have proceeded through all of that. Absolutely. But if he honestly believed, and I'm prepared to concede this and you're not, but if he honestly believed that this was a good idea, I mean, it's obviously an awful idea, but if he honestly believed it, then he could also honestly be saying to himself, well, look, we don't actually know if it's constitutional. We won't know until the court decides. I've got a shot. Let's give it a shot.
I don't believe that.
And frankly, the fact that 1/3 of the bench agreed with Biden says that he wasn't completely unreasonable. It wasn't a 9-0 decision. It wasn't even a 7-2 decision. It was a 6-3 decision.
Yeah, but that to me, then it comes back to ideology and not really being impartial and really taking a look at the constitution and what happened before that. But Robin, we're coming to the end of this show. Let me ask you a last question that I think is
Yeah.
important. Um, from my French perspective, sometimes I feel like we Americans don't do anything about executive orders and the power of the president because there's some kind of the cult of the leader. I was
Mm,
shocked to see how nobody, if
yeah.
it was Bush, Obama, Trump, and even Biden now, how
Yeah.
many Americans, I'm not saying all of them, but many Americans are like, oh, the president is God. And we've seen that a lot with President Trump.
Yeah.
And therefore thinks that the president should have that kind of power. So my question to that question is, what can we do to stop this madness, Robin? Is this we need to, I don't know, pass a legislation? Because the Constitution doesn't explicitly talk about executive order, if I'm not mistaken. So do you think Congress and the Senate could pass a law, say, the president cannot have more than 10 executive order a year or a quarter, whatsoever? Or do we need to narrow the scope of those executive
Yeah.
orders?
Right. So let's be clear. You can't stop the president passing executive orders. Any employer, any boss has to be able to order his employees around whenever they want. And that's what the executive orders are there properly to do. The problem is, as we've said, that the people he's ordering around have power that they should never be allowed to have. And I would say is inconsistent with the spirit, if not the letter, of the Constitution, right? Because this is the case because the Congress is outsourcing its role under the Constitution. We've got this bureaucratic, technocratic state. This phrase "deep state" came up a lot more over the last few years,
Yes.
and maybe we'll do a whole show on that. I think we're kind of in that territory here. That is a thing, right? Because there is a technocrat in an office in an EPA building, that's making a rule that is closing down. I'm just using this hypothetical. Closing down farms, destroying livelihoods and families, and so on and so forth. Right? That's the problem. As I said, the executive order is a problem not because it can be passed, but because its effect is something that should never be allowed. Yeah. So, did you ask? What was your question? There was a question in there, though. Oh, that was the question, right?
That was a good question.
So what do we do about it? Yeah, it comes back to the Congress, as I say.
Yeah.
But one thing you said that you got me nodding a lot, and we should definitely be explicit about this. This is culture precedes politics, right? America is a culture of trust. The high trust in society among Americans makes for very effective capitalism. It means that when people say they're going to do something or sign a contract, everybody can pretty much trust that the contract will be honored. This is a high trust culture, and we get a lot of benefits from that. But it's also a high credulity culture when it comes to figures of authority. Americans are inclined to believe what their president tells them because their patriotism is directed towards that figure. Right. So and Bush was when I really saw this. I mean, it was horrific that people just lined up behind Bush, Democrats and Republicans after 9/11. And they just, because he was saying we needed it, we had to go and kill babies in Baghdad. We had to institute a complete surveillance state top to bottom. We had to have our secret agencies doing all kinds of horrific things that only begun to come out under Edward Snowden. People just lined up. Right. Yeah. And the thing that I noticed, this as a Brit, this is something I really noticed. One of the biggest contrasts between American culture and British culture, which are close in many respects. But one of the biggest contrasts is in our political culture. If you are somebody in power in the UK, like Boris Johnson right now, you've got to justify your existence. The Brits are going to be skeptical of you because you put yourself in that position. They're not going to think more of you. They're going to kind of think less of you. They're going to be on a hair trigger to put you down. They're going to require you to earn the trust they give to their next door neighbor, because the next door neighbor isn't exercising power over them. In America, it's the opposite, right? It's like, oh, well, you're the president. You have all my trust. The default is, I trust you. I follow you. No. The Brits are skeptical of their leaders. The Americans are not. And this, interestingly, is why I think I am more scared of what's happening to my freedoms under the American government and system, even despite this document behind me, than I am if push comes to shove and I had to go back to the UK, about my loss of freedoms in the UK, because I think the Brits would say, you must be joking, before the Americans would. The Americans will tolerate more tyranny, I think, because they trust more. They believe in people more. I think a little bit more cynicism would be helpful in America right now.
I think I agree with you, and I think it's changing, though. I think more and more people are realizing that it's maybe too late, but I think more and more people are realizing that. Robin, thank you so much for this conversation. It was a wonderful time, guys. If you like this video, please feel free to subscribe and share this video. We would love that. Thank you so much for, again, watching this video. We have 2 more videos in this channel, and we will talk to you all soon. Thank you so much.